On April 21, 2015, a brutal case of black headlines shook the UK. Tracy Woodford was a nice person who lived simply with her mother and brother Sean. April 21, 2015 would be the last time 47-year-old Tracy was seen alive. That day, she went downtown to get a ring. She later decided to stop by a couple of bars. It was unusual for Tracy to drink because she had a low tolerance for alcohol. She stopped at various pubs and bars that afternoon, until she was refused alcohol because she seemed too unstable on her legs. Around 1945, Tracy walked into the Skinny Dog pub and met a charming 50-year-old man, Christopher May. Eyewitnesses later reported that she seemed nervous and fragile, but despite this, she found herself conversing with Christopher May and his group of friends. It is likely that Tracy's nervous disposition was of great interest to Christopher, who saw a dark and twisted opportunity. As the pub night progressed, Tracy began to feel comfortable with Christopher and his friends. The witnesses would then remember seeing the two flirting with each other, so much so that the man invited her to go home with him. Tracy insisted she wasn't that kind of woman, but around 11:30, cameras caught the two walking together towards his apartment. Tracy did not return home that night, and her family became deeply concerned. The next day, Christopher showed up at the restaurant where he worked, and his colleagues noticed scratches on his face. He joked that he had an accident with something he had bought at the hardware store the day before. That same afternoon, a neighbor saw him walking fatigued, carrying something. With no word from Tracy yet, her family began to act. After calling Tracy many times without any answer, they realized that that behavior was out of the ordinary, so they decided to involve the police. Police were able to trace the woman's last movements. They heard from many of the locals that Tracy had been seen for the last time flirting with Christopher, and that the two had left the pub together on April 21st, so they went straight to his apartment. There was a foul smell inside. One of the officers would later claim to have smelled what he thought was rotten meat and cat urine. Christopher seemed apprehensive as he told the officers about the events of that night, telling them that he had met Tracy and that they had left the pub together. However, he claimed that she made an inappropriate offer to Tracy and that she left after feeling offended. Christopher then said he returned home alone that night and never saw or heard from her again. The officers asked if they could search his apartment, and Christopher agreed. As they entered further into the apartment, the smell became even more sickening. They entered the bathroom and pulled back the shower curtain and found human limbs. So Christopher was taken into custody and questioned. Reconstructing the scene, the officers realized that Christopher had used a handsaw, a kitchen knife, and scissors to dismember the body. They found an Adidas backpack containing Tracy's upper torso and a small bag containing partial finger remains. Although they could not find the head of the poor victim, the news of the horror spread like a fire in the community. During the interrogation, Christopher told police that he had hidden some of her remains in a rainfall drain on April 25th. The police went to this place and made a macabre discovery. The tunnel was incredibly dark. On the right, they saw a human head lying on one side, covered with bruises, and inside a red bag, there were other remains of Tracy. That means Christopher removed Tracy's head, put it in a backpack, and walked around in public like it was nothing. Thinking about him walking in public with a severed head is incredibly disturbing. The process would have started later in 2015. A pathologist who examined Tracy's body reported that the crime had been perfectly committed, and in fact Christopher had previously worked as a butcher and knew how to use a knife, how to remove meat from the ribs, legs, and shoulders. The prosecutor said that his experience in a butcher shop seemed to be put into practice on a human body. The defense argued that the murder occurred in self-defense, and Christopher reported that he lost control during the fight, suffocating her to death. He also claimed that he vomited several times, disgusted with what he had done to Tracy. From the evidence collected, it turned out that it was not an accident. His laptop revealed that on the night of Tracy's death, he spent hours watching adult content after killing her, suggesting there was also a sexual motive for the crime. And investigators found traces of Christopher's DNA on the victim's body. The DA said it's extremely possible, if not certain, that he used the body for his own personal satisfaction after she was dead. The DA's office has argued that Tracy's murder was intentional murder, and that Christopher played with his depraved and disturbing fantasies about an innocent woman. On November 19, 2015, following a 2-week trial, Christopher May was found guilty of the murder of Tracy Woodford. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum sentence of 28 years. Christopher is reported to have remained impassive while the jury delivered its verdict. The burden of the tragedy has fallen heavily on both the Woodford family and the entire community. Tracy's life was interrupted as brutally as possible. Her family was destroyed by grief,